Did you know that the forgotten founder of Zionism went on to play a leading role in Agudas Yisrael, or that Rav Chatzkel Abramsky was responsible for the continued presence of the Muslim Waqf on Har HaBayis? It turns out that the margins of history tell the real story. Behind the Times dives into the big concepts and overlooked moments that carry vast meaning, all through the lens of Torah and rabbinic thought. This is Jewish history like you've never heard it before. Behind the Times, with Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Galinsky and Gedalia Gutentag. In the spring of 1844, I left everything near and dear to me on earth. I left the wife of my youth and 6 lovely children, dearer to me than my natural life, and an excellent farm with everything comfortable around me. I left all these in the pursuit of truth, and for the sake of truth alone. I had often from my youth asked my soul, where is perfect, incontestable truth to be found? The answer was, it exists everywhere. It is in the heart, in the conscious evidence of its existence, against which no reasoning can prevail. Still, I was not satisfied. Prayer after prayer and aspiration after aspiration ascended up to God. I knew that He would not deceive me, and therefore trusted my all to Him, and still pursued truth. Truth in the abstract was never developed. I therefore found one key that presented itself clearly to my mind that would infallibly lead me through the door of truth. My dear Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Galinsky, do I sound like a mid-19th century American wannabe diplomat?
Not quite.
Well, I don't know why. Perhaps there may be a problem with my accent. But that long and passionate, and I'd say almost unsettling, declaration of faith and search for truth came from one of the most unusual, colorful men ever to walk the face of both America and the Holy Land. His name was Warder Cresson, or as he would later call himself, Michal Boaz Yisrael Ben Avram.
Beautiful introduction, Gedalia.
Well, we're not finished. Listen to this, the stuff that who he was. A Quaker, a religious wanderer, and the short-lived American consul to Jerusalem.
A Quaker accused to be a shaker.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Quaker who became, well, he did possibly become a shaker, but you're really jumping the gun over here. Let's just finish the laundry.
I couldn't hold back. But.
Let's just finish the laundry list of who Warder Cresson was. Warder Cresson, Michal Boaz Yisrael Ben Avram, a Quaker, a religious wanderer, an American consul to Jerusalem, in fact, the first, for all of 8 days. He was a proto-Zionist.
I want to point out that some even claim that it wasn't even for 8 days.
Okay, we're getting deeper and deeper into the weeds over here. And eventually, crucially, he became a Ger Tzedek who spent the last years of his life living with the Jews of Yerushalayim. About 6 months ago, I interviewed the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who is known as Mike Huckabee. Now, he's already...
For some reason, many people make the comparison between him
Well,
and
many people, Rabbi Ephraim, you're flattering them. I am the many people, because I've not, in fact, when I came to prepare for this interview with Mike Huckabee, which is obviously very much based a bit about who he is, but also about the whole America-Israel relationship and the Iran war, etc., so I prepared for it. One of the questions I noted was based on a previous visit to that office to interview the previous ambassador. It was a very different type of character. And the office doesn't change. And in the corridor, thin, narrow corridor leading into the office, and by the way, you're not allowed to photograph the office itself because it would tell people from the outside where the ambassador sits. But in the corridor leading into his office, there are 2 rows of photos, framed kind of photos of the predecessors or the people, the previous incumbents. And obviously, I think they go back to the first, the sort of grey and white. In the 1948, the first U.S. ambassador to Israel was a man called James MacDonald, who was Truman's ambassador to Israel. And then it goes through right to all the names that you recognize. And so I went through, and one of the questions I prepared was, and in fact I asked him, was, out of all these people, who do you most identify with? And that was just kind of a way to open up a deeper dimension and kind of some self-reflection. And he gave me a standard answer, kind of quite predictable. And I said to him, actually, I think the person you could be most similar to is a man, have you ever heard of Warder Cresson? And he hadn't heard of watercresson.
You were the
And
first person to make the comparison between them?
to him,
No,
or
no,
in general, yes.
generally.
I don't
No,
know of
because
anyone
I've
else.
heard it. Maybe I heard it because of you. Maybe
Yeah,
that's right.
it's certainly something that the first thing that occurred to me that here is the first true evangelical to hold the office of America's highest American representative in the Holy Land. The first true evangelical before Mike Huckabee has to be watercresson, because as we're going to see, he was fire-breathing. Now, the comparison, it has to be said, Ambassador Huckabee, undoubtedly you are amongst the vast audience of this podcast. If you're listening, I was not making the comparison as to the next stages, because he had, Warder, as we're going to see, had a very eventful life when he eventually, once he took up the position. But certainly, and this is not a joke, there is deep-rooted connection, which I think we should explore, between the Christian Zionism of Mike Huckabee and today's evangelical, and what is called the proto-Zionism, right, the early pre-Zionism, which is practically the same thing of the American evangelicals of the 19th and early 19th century. So
You're rightly pointing out that all his activities, which included establishing agricultural colonies in Eretz Yisrael, was way before the Zionist movement even was founded.
Absolutely. And it foreshadows, therefore, the Christian Zionism of today, which was a major part of it. I think there's various questions. The truth is, this is such an unbelievable story and tale. We've got to cover a lot of it here. Let's say there'll be a little bit of talk about various Christian denominations as he goes from, Quaker to Shaker to Hicksite to Millerite to who knows what.
Seventh Day.
Oh, yes, the Adventists and then the Seventh-day Adventists. And we're going to be discussing, obviously, some of the U.S. diplomats so long. So there's even going to be a reference to kitchen design, because that is connected as well to this modern-day kitchen design.
And you won't forget there's a halachic debate involved in that.
There is a major halachic debate, to which we're going to be, so correct, we're not just going to be discussing Christian theology. We have some halakha as well. But I mean, we're going to see this as it raises, for me, the exploration here is a little bit to redress the record, to set the record straight, because this man, given how erratic he was, given how far he went and how he cycled between different beliefs and went through them, like other people changing newspaper subscription, he has been accused of being just totally unstable. And I think that is not perhaps the judgment that I would come out with. He was a ger tzedek and one who lived as such. And so we're going to be discussing.
And you must say that the American court at the end decided that he was stable.
Yes. So, Rabbi Galinsky, I think we can set sail across the ocean of this story. Okay, Rabbi Ephraim, the story begins in the year 1798, when watercresson was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he gets his name from his parents' surname. His father was Eliot Cresson, or John Eliot Cresson, and his mother's called Mary Warder. So what do they call parents of Warder and Cresson? They call him, very imaginatively, Watercresson, right? And they are crucially Quakers. Now, that is a very important thing to understand, because it's a remarkable thing, by the way, because to quake is literally, in Israeli terms, we call them Haredim.
Haredim,
Right? And that is how they were mocked for. This was a Christian sect that started in the 1650s in England. They had split off from the Church of England, and it's a really important thing, this whole business, to understand. That's why the basic theology here, even without getting into it, but the basic awareness of who he was raised as. The Quakers were radical. They were already a split, right? They were already a split and from a split off on a branch from the Church of England, which was itself a break off in the time Henry VIII, a couple of hundred years earlier, from the Catholic Church. So the church is just splinters and splinters, right?
How big of a split was it when you're talking about the Quakers? Was it like a tiny sect? Or
No. They were, from what I understand, it was founded by this guy, I forget his name, very charismatic preacher who actually preached in a place called Pendle. Now, I remember Pendle. Pendle is famous for, it's not far from Manchester where I grew up, and it's not likely to be the subject of a Behind the Times episode ever. But this place in Lancashire, which is the historic county of Manchester, had the Pendle witches. They had witches were burnt there. The last witch burning in England happened there. And I used to go to school on a bus, and look, there was another bus that went past that went to Pendle. And it was a special bus line, and it had on it painted on the side of it was a witch on a broomstick. So that is why I'm aware of
Claim to fame.
Claim to fame. The Pendle Witches have officially made it into a Mishpacha podcast. That's not bad going. But anyway, so the point being that the Quakers were a significant sect, and they were very much mistreated by the English authorities, who didn't like the fact that because the Church of England was, as it were, the state religion. And so they were badly treated and locked up and persecuted. Persecuted is the word I'm actually looking for.
Can I just diverge a second for
Yes.
something which might be taken as a joke?
Go for it.
Peter Gudalia, explain.
We shall all judge how funny it is.
Okay, explain the connection between Quaker Oats, the guy with the black hat, and the Quakers. Is there any connection?
Well, I think there is, because the Quakers were kind of were famous for certain enterprises. In fact, it was a Quaker, very likely, who founded it. But there's other things that the Quakers founded. We know that one of the big banks in England, or in fact it's a global bank, is the Barclays Bank. It was founded by a Quaker.
They had a branch here in Eretz Yisrael as well. When I was growing up in Eretz Yisrael,
Barclays Bank.
it was a
that
Barclays
was a
Bank.
holdover from the the British presence here. And so the Quakers basically were very industrious. They were very hardworking. They were not showy. And because they were not allowed, a bit like the Jews, they were kept out of the various guilds because they were non-conformists. They wouldn't obey the normal rules and be a Church of England follower. And so therefore they were barred from various businesses. So like the Jews, they started a bank. But it wasn't just that. They were involved in many agricultural things. And all of these Christian sects therefore had strange imprints on going forward.
In their theology, are they closer to Avodah Zarah or more distant from Avodah Zarah?
I don't know. I just know that they were very much, from what I understand, they were called, by the way, the Society of Friends, right? Sounds a bit happy-clappy and new agey. And the point that they had was that they didn't like a lot of the worship and all the formality. They wanted a person to find the inner light, which is really new agey. But that was their belief. Anyway, so what happens is we don't know a lot about early Warder Crescent. Again, born in 1798. He goes and is apprenticed to learn farming, where he becomes actually a very successful farmer in 1815 when he's 17. And that is how he makes.
This is in America, right?
In America, in Philadelphia, we see him as, he is successful in becoming some scale of getting some good parnassa. And crucially, in 1821, he marries his wife, Elizabeth Townsend, he's going to have 6 children. And this is going to be really at the heart of what happens to him later, because the Shalom Bayis there is not great as they go in, let's say, they diverge religiously, is fair to say. So, Rabbi Ephraim, I think it's important to say over here that it's so intensely, the reason that Behind the Times has been talking about Christian theology over here is because it's really important to understand the context, that it was a time of great religious fervor and ferment. And I think it's really hard for us to imagine that, like today's world, that Britain and America could have been so intensely religious. But right through the 19th century, there were waves of intense religious revivals. And this is the Christian religious revival the context in which he's operating.
So I just want to point out that there was an earlier interest in Yiddishkeit in the United States. And I once wrote about a visit by someone who is like, everyone knows about the Chidah, right? The way he dressed and where he came from, Hebron.
Yeah.
And he traveled all around Europe. We don't know if the Chidah ever reached the United States. We don't have records of that. But we have someone from the same generation who was very similar to like his upbringing and his Rebbeim and all that, who was called Karigal or Charigal, whatever you want to call him.
Yes.
And he came to America. This is before Warder Crescent's time. And he made a great hashpah on the intellectuals of
the Christians.
I don't know if probably Christians. What else did you have at that time? But the president of Yale was very close to him. Some wanted to say that the emblem of Yale is Urim Betumim, and I think some wanted to relate it to him, but others argue on it. But the fact was that he attended his sermons, and he was very close to him, and he held discussions with him. And we even have like descriptions of the president of Yale describing these discussions with Chacham Kariga. So to point out that the interest in Yiddishkeit started before Warder Crescent's time.
So that's very interesting, actually, Rabbi Ephraim, because this interest in Yiddishkeit is also an interest in the Bible and in Scripture in general. It's so, what a fascinating thing it is that the Britain, which officially always had a state church, a Church of England, right, still today, right, the monarch, King Charles, is actually the head of the Church of England. Despite that, it is such a secular place today, whereas America, where there's a separation of church and state, is a much more religious place. There's people much more comfortable talking about the Christian on a general, their faith. And that is the origins. In America, it was founded by, those who came on the Mayflower. They were fleeing religious persecution, whether they were Catholic, whether they were fleeing Catholicism or they're fleeing the established Church of England. They got to America and they said, we actually want to separate church and state to protect religion, right? Because they were religious. And this is, in that context, you see how easy it is to have these, we're going to see over here, the intense religiosity of these people. Walter Crescent was really not unusual in his intense religiosity, perhaps in the degree and the where he's willing to follow his own truth, that he was unusual. But that is the context.
Do you know that Rav Grylak, Zechrono Livracha, the editor of Mishpacha for many years,
Yep.
for many years, was pushing this idea that it could, for the good of Yiddishkeit and Eretz Yisrael, to separate church and state, to separate dat u'medina.
This is, by the way, it's so interesting. He pushed that.
He pushed that, but the Gdolim at the end did not agree with him. And I think he admitted that the Gdolim did not agree with him.
I think Lord Jacobowitz in England was considered to be, an outlier in that he also said, he offered, I think it was Golda Meir or somebody, he said, why don't, if we stop pushing Shabbos observance in public, meaning enforcing that,
right,
would you, in return for you adding more Yiddishkeit to the secular Israeli school system?
Right.
I mean, he was he was.
No, the Gdolim were clearly very afraid that the very, very strong anti-religious background of the founders of the state if there would be a separation,
that would be it.
That would be it. It would be like throwing out everything. So
very interesting.
It was too risky to take that path.
So in that context of religious fervor, it has to be explained, where was this actually coming from? It was across the world. It wasn't just in America. Remember, this is the intellectual context is like this. That remember in 1815, Napoleon loses the Battle of Waterloo. That ends the Napoleonic Wars that have been going on for 25 years, or something like that, or the wars of the French Revolution. So the idea of now Napoleon, this is a bit of a tangent, but it's related. Napoleon wasn't just a conqueror. He was there, and he was there to spread certain ideas of enlightenment, of rationalism, and the backlash to Napoleon's, crusading and conquering drive across Europe, beyond Europe, really, there was the intense backlash against Napoleonism became a backlash against the Enlightenment and a return to more mysticism and, in turn, religion. Right? That was all over the world, and you can track that. That was very much people said, and that happened in England. It was as far Russia. There was a deep reassertion of old religious and ideas that happened. And I'm pretty sure in that context, by the way, there was the Russian Tsars were able to take a grip and to crack down on the Jews. Right? The Cantonist decrees, etc. These were in the decades then, in the backlash to this whole idea of enlightenment and modernity. So that's the context in which he is about to Walter Crescent. He's now, let's say by the year he publishes in 1827 his first. He's a notable writer of pamphlets and religious tracts. He publishes in 1827 his first. He's 29 years old, which is a nice age for publishing thing, as you and I can attest. And therefore, he publishes something called A Humble and Affectionate Address to the Select Members of the Abington Quarterly Meeting, which is...
I didn't understand a word of what you just said.
It just sounds like mind-numbingly boring, but obviously back then caused an uproar because he wrote, I was called of the Lord. And this is a local farmer who suddenly feels that he's called by the Lord, right? To speak out against the whatever it was. External things, he wrote, cannot reach unto the internal nature of the soul. And he criticized the Quaker leadership they were getting too institutional, I think it was. And he said, and he then called, come out of Babylon, my people, and partake not of her iniquities, lest ye also be partakers of her plagues. Right? I love this. It's just lovely. It's just lovely, all this Christian type of exaltations. But I think what's very important, again, to translate all of that into basics, what he was doing was he was, rebelling against and criticizing Quaker mainstream leadership. And that shows, I think, the beginning, first evidence of what we saw, a streak of what we'd call kanos, like zealotry, of purism or puritanism, or wrong word, to be purist, purism, right? Meaning, it's very clear in which he says, external things cannot reach into the internal nature of the soul, okay? He's talking about we need pneumius. It's the soul that matters, it's not the outside. Now, that's very much in line with Quakerism, sounds like, but this, crucially, he's going to take all the way. He's going to take it all the way. He keeps looking for the essence of things, right? And this is a very important thing.
A modern-day Yisroi.
Yes. And at this point, Ephraim, I think perhaps we can just start raising the question, just to bear in mind, listeners should bear in mind, Walter Cresson is going to be dismissed by everyone, many people, as just erratic and unstable. But you have to ask yourself... I think the sign
of him being unstable is only after he converts to
Yes, that's
Judaism.
when it becomes a legal thing. But I'm talking in retrospect, it's something just worth bearing in mind. But how many genuine Gerim, right, have been dismissed by others as just crazy? And so Gerus, or ardor in pursuit of the truth, is not necessarily a psul, a disqualification. I think we should bear that in mind.
But we have to realize that, especially in those days, to become a ger was a very difficult process. I mean, there wasn't... Today, we're accepting many more gerim than I think any period in history. Like
very interesting that. I wonder.
It was always a very schwere process. I mean, in Sephardic communities, by the way, Walter Cresson was, and that's going to be part of my argument with you later on, he was misguided in a Sephardi bezdin. And that's going to make a problem at the end. We're
going to get. Let's get going with this because
what I'm saying is that if someone was accepted as a ger during that kufa, it showed that he really went through a process, and therefore, for us, I'm not talking about the goyim who are criticizing, but for us, you should realize that they probably wouldn't have accepted someone who was out of his mind.
Let us go through Rabbi Ephraim quickly over here. So I just flagged it at the beginning, but isn't it delicious that when he starts leaving behind the Quakers, he's suspected of being a shaker, right? And the Shakers actually do shake during their prayers, and they get very into it like this. Again, great preparation for shockling.
They were even more frummer than the Quakers.
Correct. But I said there was a kitchen design point over here, and it's true. If one of the modern or one of the styles that is in fashion they sell, if you go to the kitchen, you ask for a shaker style kitchen. It is it's very simple, smooth lines. It's not ornate. And because the Shakers, even more than the Quakers, were about being very no frills, but everything good quality. So a Shaker style kitchen literally came from the Shakers. If you have Quaker oats, right, you have Shaker kitchens.
Right?
Shaker kitchens. Yeah. So anyway, he's now in 1830. He's now 32. Publishes another pamphlet, Babylon the Great is Falling, in which he basically hits out at the Quakers. And I think we can fast forward another 10 years to when he's 42, 1840, to a real turning point when he meets a man, a rabbi, Reverend Isaac Lisa, who through that becomes interested in Judaism. Rabbi Galinsky,
many listeners who are interested in early history of Yiddishkeit in America will probably recognize the name of Isaac Lisa. It's very interesting that he did something that was unconventional at that time. And we know that one of the things that Orthodox Rabbanim were afraid to do was to lecture in the vernacular, right? To use like the local. Right? Today it seems posh to us, right?
Correct.
Right. But for example,
except if you're Hassidish, where by the way, they've still remained with this. The Hasidim.
Right. By the way, the Ritvaz, when he came to America, came to Chicago.
Yeah.
He was very angry that Rabbanim was speaking in English at the podium. Like,
right.
For him, that was.
It was just a pirza.
It was a pirza. So Rabbi Isaac Lesser, or in some places they call him Lesser, he was one of the first Orthodox Rabbanim who spoke from the pulpit in English. And that's why he had such a following. And he translated books of halacha and of Torah thought in English. He was like one of the founders of this.
And he was also
English
one of the
literature.
founders of the Jewish press because he published something called the Occident. It's not like doesn't mean an accident. It's an old Latin word for the West, right? You had the Orient, which is the East, and then the Occident was the West. The West, what we would call today the Western world. So he had for about a quarter of a century publication. I think it was a monthly, and at great length. It's actually, you can download them on the National Library of Israel. They are fascinating. By the way, I'll tell you what I found. I'll tell you one absolute historical gem that I found. Just like if Mishpacha magazine, some of it, in 100 years' time, if you want to understand current frum society, you're going to pick up Mishpacha magazine and you're going to look at some of the articles, but actually you're going to find a lot of enlightenment from the adverts. It's the adverts that tell you a lot. So too, it's actually the same process, the adverts in the Occident, because they went on for dozens of pages, these huge things, long essays, and they're very interesting to read. I was searching for one of them about Warder Crescent's court case, an insanity trial, which we're going to get to, which was covered in Reverend Isaac Lisa's publication, The Occident, and I found some adverts. Now, then they had no pictures or no anything. They were just a few lines of text, probably on the back page or on the inside page.
Well, they're advertising, yeah.
They were all, it's fascinating. I wish I had it over here.
I know, a kosher hotel for Pesach.
No. Steaks. Steak restaurants. No, listen to this. They were advertising the forerunners to the Beis Yaakovs, right? There was for example, their education institutions. So one that caught my eye was
he opened up education in his own living room.
I didn't know that. So
Yes.
that is why he was
Right.
a key figure in this way. So for example, long before there was the Beis Yaakovs in America, we talk about the 1860s, we had the Mrs. Emanuel's, a school for well-brought-up Jewish girls, whatever it was. And it's fascinating. But the gem that I found from about 1863, and I could not believe it, was an advert for the school run by Dr. M. Hirsch, son of Rabbi S.R. Hirsch.
Wow.
The school being in Frankfurt, right, in Germany.
So what, it was like a schnorr advertisement?
No, it wasn't a schnorr advertising. It was an advertising for pupils, people applying.
From
America. From America, and it gave two local references to establish the school. And the interesting thing is, it said, I don't know, per semester or per year, I don't remember, £15 sterling.
Wow.
So there in America, right? What an international. This is 1863. Right?
A school in Frankfurt, tuition.
Now, Dr. Mendel Hirsch was the son of Rav Shimshon Hirsch, who ran Rav Hirsch's Meisters. Right? Isn't that fascinating? I knew, and you know what I did with that, Rabbi Ephraim? I stuck that on the WhatsApp group, which is of the Ashkenaz, all over there. And people know a lot from there. These are all professional yekkers.
And they didn't know about this.
Nobody had any idea. The best response that I got was someone gave a response explaining why it would have been priced in sterling and not in dollars or marks or something else.
But why would someone send a student from America to Frankfurt?
It is fascinating. It is, where could you have gone? Remember that Reverend Isaac Lisa is considered to be the father of modern Orthodoxy.
Right.
And a very close working comparison. He himself was, by the way, born in Germany. He was from Germany. And this style of education, you couldn't go back to Poland and get a Latin and German education there, or decent Western education.
So you just mentioned that his background. So I was interested to find out who his Rabbeim were.
Yes.
And no one brought this piece of information.
I don't know.
I finally found a Yiddish publication
Go on.
who wrote that the Noida Yehuda had a Talmud by the name of Binyamin Kohen. It seemed to be a very public, very known Gadol at that time. And Rabbi Isaac Lesser was a Talmud of the Noida Yehuda.
Very interesting. So, Rabbi Ephraim, I think what's interesting is that Warder Crescent becomes, remember, he's from Philadelphia, and Reverend Isaac Lisa, is a congregation, Mikveh Israel, from 1829. So he's there in Philadelphia. And he is
He's also close to another Rav called Rabbi Mordechai Noach Emanuel.
Mordechai Emanuel Noah, yeah. So we'll get to him in a minute. But the Lisa thing is very interesting because Lisa himself is one of the first of, I suppose, what we'd recognize from today, the Orthodox leaders who have ability to, get involved in interfaith and urge Christians to support the Jewish people, right? It's very much something that we recognize today. And he writes this, as Lisa writes a book, first of all, The Jews and the Mosaic Law, which was read widely by Christians as well.
He put out, I think, the first American English translation of the Tanakh.
I didn't know that.
By Lisa. I'm almost sure. Check that out.
So one of the things that he talks about there is his belief in the ultimate restoration of the Israelites and the gathering of the exiles, right? And he keeps talking about this. And in 1840, he becomes a very national American Jewish figure, leader, because that's the year of the blood libel. We talked about the Damascus blood libel, in which it involves Adolphe Crémieux of France and Moses Montefiore of England. And it causes a wave of outrage across the Western world. Crucially, Lisa leads the reaction in Philadelphia and invites Christian ministers to speak from his pulpit about the persecution of the Jews, and whether it's connected straight to this or in general to the uproar. The State Department lodges it's the first time in American history that the State Department responds to mistreatment of Jews who are not American citizens. So you can see that this is this kind of what we call pro-Jewish, proto-Zionist feeling all coming together to urge the American government into action in a way which we're now I suppose AIPAC, or look at the Trump government working alongside us with Iran over here. And that is, I think we have to, just because for the flavor of it, I think we can mention what is going on over here, that at the time, in the 1840s, there's even more religious fervor, in which there's a guy called William Miller in upstate New York, which is probably near the bungalow colonies of today, found something called the Adventist Church, which he calculated for about 1843-44 as definitely going to be the Messiah. And when it doesn't happen, it triggers something called the Great Disappointment, which leads to many people founding the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is still around today. But very much you can see, again, the atmosphere there of the American public in turmoil about, or certain sections of it, leading to a return to Zion. Rabbi Ephraim, you mentioned before that Mordechai Manuel, and he was, again, in the same period, in the 1840s, he's urging a return to Zion. He's a person who's a remarkable person because in 1825, he attempts to establish a Jewish refuge in the Niagara River, on an island in the Niagara River, and he wants to solve the question of the Jewish of anti-Semitism by founding something called Ararat, right? I love that, right? You're going to found a Tevas Noach in the Niagara River. He's very publicly, because he's high profile, was an American ambassador to Tunis in North Africa, and he's saying that all the signs are that America is going to be part of the leadership, lead the Christian world in leading the Jewish people back to the land of Israel. And so that very much is the context for the next dramatic stage of Walter Crescent's life. Rabbi Ephraim, in 1844, in that context of American turmoil, over religion and the arrival of the Messiah, Walter Crescent decides to pick up and move here and actually, as he said in the opening passage, to actually seek the truth over here. There were a couple of important Philadelphians, including a congressman, who recommended him to the State Department for the job, and he volunteered to do so without being paid, which has obviously appealed to them because he was, had his independent means. But the important thing is, Ephraim, it's one of the shortest assignments on record.
So you have to simultaneously, you have to point out, and this point, I think this is where he has to leave his wife and children, because he's coming to Eretz Yisrael.
Yes.
And they don't come together with him.
Correct.
So that's the first break that he has with his family.
And it's a crucial thing because that shows the type of man who it's not just a career, right, but it's also some religious dream. Within 8 days of this, it causes a lot of an uproar within American diplomatic circles or the government circles, because a week after he receives his commission, so the former Secretary of the Treasury writes to the Secretary of State. He says, the papers have recently announced the appointment of Walter Crescent as consul to Jerusalem. This man is the brother of Elliot Crescent, who is much distinguished as a colonizer. But the consul has been laboring under an aberration of mind for many years. So that's the first, Rabbi Ephraim, the first accusation of being unstable. And it says like this: his mania is of the religious species. He was born a Quaker, wants to be a preacher, has gone round the compass from one job to another, sometimes preaching about the church doors and in the streets. And then it says, basically, he's too extreme for them. His passion is for religious controversy, the letter continued, and no doubt he expects to convert Jews and Mohammedans in the East. But in truth, he is withal a very weak-minded man, and his mind, what there is of it, is quite out of order. His appointment is made of a theme of ridicule by all who know him. So in other words, this guy's a joke, he's unstable.
Now, why did I tell you in the beginning of the podcast that it didn't even last 8 days?
Yeah.
It's because the account that I read, which is different than what you're going through, is that they wrote the letter even before his appointment. It took effect, but it didn't reach him until later. That's why the people say that he had it for 8 days. But in truth, he didn't even have it for 1 day. It was decided against his appointment right after he received the initial agreement, and but he received the letter only later on.
That's interesting. So hold on. Rabbi Ephraim, can I ask you, if you want to break unpleasant news like this to somebody, especially someone you think is unstable, how do you go about it? What are you going to say?
I would probably hide the real reason.
Right. So how, in fact, did he do it? So the letter he received from the Secretary of State, Walter Cresson, received, I am instructed by the President to inform you that having reconsidered the proposal to establish a consulate at Jerusalem, he is of the opinion it's not called for by public service, and therefore declines to establish it at present. In other words,
instead of saying you're not good for the job,
you're saying, there's no job.
There's no job anymore.
Now, do you think that John Calhoun, do you think that the Secretary of State actually had told President John Tyler? I highly doubt it. It was one of these classic ways of saying, I was instructed by the President. But crucially, what happens, Rabbi Ephraim, is
he continues to work as if he is the consulate.
Correct. He's a bit of a legend. He makes himself a stamp, fashions a stamp as the consul, a fake consular stamp, and he uses actually to provide protection as of the American government. And there it gets interesting because he becomes, I think for about a year or something, this farce or this charade continues, and who's to stop him? I mean, you don't have
a local police force.
What are they going to do? Send SEAL Team 6 or the U.S. Rangers in? It's not the type of thing that happens. It's too far away. This is an American. He's got independent means. He just needs to fly a flag and make himself a SEAL. And he has the letter. No, he doesn't need to show the letter. He doesn't need to show that it's been rescinded in any way. So we know that other people during that time, Westerners in general, saw him and he was a colorful figure, let's say, to say the least. But he is then on the verge of on the borderlands between Christianity, in which he's had this long, intense journey through, and Judaism. And it's in 4 years after he arrives that he actually becomes a ger.
Now, here's something very, very interesting. Someone has raised the possibility that the story of Walter Cresson actually made it into what we call the tshuva response literature. Okay? What are we referring to?
Yep.
We're referring to a tshuva in the Binyan Tzion, written by the Aruch Laner, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger.
Rebbe of Rishim Shem Falhash.
Right, and he was considered to be, people who have a Yekesha background, because it's the last Yekesha world-recognized Gadol. And he was, if you want just an example, you've heard probably here in Eretz Yisrael that when you want to give Mishloach Manos, so the first thing the person should do is to find a Shaliach. Do you ever hear that, Kumra?
People like to send it to a Shaliach.
Where did that come from?
Go.
Nowhere. It came from nowhere until the Binyan Tzion raised the possibility. The Binyan Tzion himself was not sure about this Chumrah, but the Mishnah Berurah quotes this Chumrah, the Binyan Tzion, and that's how it came. It filtered down to us. Mm-hmm. And today, many people, even though Rabbi Shlomo Zalman has a few hasagas on this, but Rabbi Shlomo Zalman himself was machar to send one with a shliach and one without a shliach, because he had a suffix that maybe without a shliach is better. But in any case, that shows you the sheer power of psak of the Aruch LaNer.
Correct.
So in any case, a question reaches the Aruch LaNer. The story behind the question was that there was a posek of the Ashkenazi, and I'm stressing the posek of the Ashkenazi Kila, a member of the Bezdin of the Ashkenazi Kila, was Rabbi Moshe Lemel, one of the members. He wasn't like the major posek of Yerushalayim. He was one of the members of the Bezdin of Yerushalayim.
Yeah.
Rabbi Shmuel Salant was there already, but for some reason the question came to him, and the question involved a Ger Tzedek.
And the question, hold on, it came to him on Erev Shabbos just before Shabbos. Crucially,
Right.
and he said he didn't have time. He writes in his tshuva, he didn't have time to check it out with other people, and hence it caused a controversy, as you're about to say.
Right. So the question is that they come to him, they said that there is a Ger Tzedek who went through a bris milah.
Yep.
And I'm now bringing you information that's written in the Shaila, in the Binyan Tzion, in the Aruch LaNer. And he says that he fell sick because of the milah. He was very weak in state, and he could not go through the Tvila immediately after the milah.
Correct.
Now, the halacha is ger shemal veloy taval. So it's the gerus is not a gerus until he does tvila.
Right.
Now, the question is he entirely not a ger,
Right.
or is
He's
he
stuck
a
in a
ger
halfway
that
house.
needs tvila? Okay?
Yeah.
So that's a very delicate balance over here. And Rabbi Moshe Lemel was of the opinion that he is not considered a Jew at all.
And crucially, what's the question?
The question is that there's halacha that goy sheshavas chayev misa.
A guy can't keep Shabbos, and
Guy can't
he's
keep
stuck in the limb. He's halfway. Well, what is he? Shabbos comes in. Is he an entire goy or half a Jew?
Right. So Rabbi Moshe Lemel paskins for him
Yeah.
that he has to write 2 letters on Shabbos, and he does so. And the next morning, this Rabbi Moshe Lemel himself tells the Binyan Tzion, he was attacked by all the Rabbanim, the Sephardi and Ashkenazi Rabbanim.
How you talking? Make a Jew be Mechala Shabbos.
Right.
Literally.
And Rabbi Shmuel Salant also opposed
really?
his psak.
Really?
And it seems that he started sending letters all over to see if there's anyone that's going to agree with him.
Yeah.
So the Aruch LaNer, interesting, says that if you look through his svaras, they're thorough svaras.
Meaning there was a basis for
There was a basis for Rabbi Moshe Lemel's psak.
Yeah.
However, the Aruch LaNer points out that he asked around all the Batei Dinim that were Oisik and Gir, and he never heard anyone say...
Meaning it made sense in theory, but that wasn't the practice.
Exactly.
It's quite amazing that the question had never kind of been codified until 1848.
Right.
Amazing.
Right. So I think the svara that he brings over there is that a person who went through Milah was already Poiresh Mei Ben Noya. He's not a full-fledged goy anymore.
Right.
And therefore he wouldn't have that halacha
Goy
of Goy
Shavas.
Shavas Chayiv Misa.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the halachic discussion about this story. Now, how does that connect in to our story of Gedalia? So someone raised the possibility that the person that we're talking about here that asked Rabbi Moshe Lemel the question was our dear Water Crescent.
Now, hold on. Firstly, it's important to say this person's Rabbi Yirmiyah, I think, Milevsky or something, he wrote on about 13 years ago. He came up with this thing because in 2013, they found water crescents cava on Har HaZeisim.
Right,
And-
so we're jumping the gun, right? So Water Crescent became a full-fledged Sephardi Jew.
Yeah.
And that's why I have a problem with this suggestion.
Yes,
Okay?
yes.
He became a full-fledged Sephardi Jew, and he married a Sephardi woman, and he had 2 kids, a son and a daughter,
Both of whom...
both of whom passed away after he passed away, like a few years later. And
so no descendants.
there's no descendants today.
Yeah.
But his caver was lost for many years,
Mhm.
and they finally found it in Har HaZeisim.
So the point is that when they found it, so this research, Rabbi Yirmiyah Milevsky, says, hey, maybe Water Crescent was the mysterious ger in question in the Tshuva, the Binyan Tzion Tzadik Simon Tzadik Aleph. Why? Because what was mysterious about it was, if you read the Tshuva, Be'ez Hashem Altona, which is where the Aruch LaNer lived in Germany, Yinvav Chavav Ir Tafresh 1849, he says, Kontur Laharav Goin, Rav Asher Lemel, okay, and then he says, you asked a question, and he quotes the question from Asher Lemel, But Uvda de Asali a case that came to our hands in Yerushalayim, or Kodesh, it says what happened was an Eini Yehudi had a Mila, and this non-Jew came Mimedinas Morocco, meaning it sounds like he came from Morocco, which is a strange thing. Morocco's an Arab country. It could, it's a lot of people there. As this blog pointed out in 2013, was a lot of people there will have Mila in general, right? But what made it very interesting was the date. Because if we go back up a bit, we see where in Walter Crescent's own writings, he wrote this book, which I quote, which was the dramatic opening passage called Key of David. And in this book, he says like this: in Jerusalem, in my former faith, until the day of March 1848, when I became fully satisfied that I could never obtain strength and rest, but by doing as Ruth did and saying to her mother-in-law, or Naomi, the Jewish church, right? He calls it the Jewish church. Entreat me not to leave thee, for whither thou goest I will go. Basher Telche Elech, Megillas Rus. Right? In short, he writes, upon the 28th day of March 1848, I was circumcised, entered the Holy Covenant, and became a Jew when he was 49 years old. Now, that date, 28th day of March 1848, do a quick search, as this rabbi did, and you find that it corresponds exactly to the day of the tshuva that this gerus happened. As Rav Asher writes, he says, Yom Gimel Chav Gimel Liarach Adar Sheni Shas Tafresh Ches. Right? So he suggested, as this Rabbi Yirmiyah,
that Morocco is America.
If you just add, if you add the thing, there's Maraka is Amaraka, right? It's an ingenious suggestion, which you have a problem with.
Right, exactly, because number one, this rabbi himself points out that the source that he came from Morocco is not only from the Tshuva of the Binyan Tzion. I think he writes there's other Sfarim who point out, I think from Rav Frumkin's Sefer, right, on Yerushalayim. I think he mentions there a Sefer that mentions the whole story,
yeah.
And he mentions the ger was from Morocco,
yeah.
And it could be he was based on the Binyan Tzion. That's possible.
Yeah.
It could be. Okay, but if there's another source that he came from Morocco, it's going to be very unlikely that both places are going to make the same mistake, right? Yeah. The second problem I have with it is that all the sources point to the fact that he was working with the Sephardi Bezdin. Mm-hmm. Walter Crescent was working with the Sephardi Bezdin, right? And he became a Sephardi Jew, right? And here he's asking a shaila, dafka.
Well, it says the Megillah happened, or he said... It says the shaila happened to Asher,
right? Who was the head, the member of the Bezdin of the Ashkenazi Kehillah,
which is a different, right? Obviously,
right? It's a different Bezdin.
I mean, it's not impossible.
Yeah, it is possible that he was Mizgaya here, and then
this guy is like. By the way, that's typically Israeli. This is what happens nowadays. You daven in one place, and you ask your shailas in another place.
Yeah, but you have to understand at that time Yerushalayim was very small. Okay. They were all concentrated in the old city of Yerushalayim.
Yeah.
It's very, I don't know, it seems weird. He has a very good point regarding the date.
Yeah.
That I agree with you 100%.
It's very strange. It was just two Gerim and
right. On the same day.
Who were of a particular age, because, again, if this has been a very young Ger, then perhaps he wouldn't have got ill like in this way. It was, this guy was 48. It was already, there's already more of an issue. So you, in other words, say, no, it could...
No, I'm just raising it
it's
down.
It's not clear. And you're right. By the way, the picture that we have of Walter Crescent is worth looking at for it, because you see him with this big Sephardi yarmulke, huge, ornate thing.
He became very becovered here in the Sephardi Yerushalayim.
And this is one of the things I want to say. I think to say that we're going to see now, as he goes, let's jump over to the next stage, because he goes back to America as a ger. And there he just, everything, just a total pandemonium around him, because this is a Quaker, Shaker, Hicksite, whatever they are, it has become a Jew. Now, you're allowed to do many things, but one thing you're not allowed to do as a Christian, you can become another denomination, but becoming a Jew is just it's pasnished, right? So he becomes he goes back and he finds that to his he's expecting to be welcomed back into the
he has possessions. He has possessions.
Correct. He has by then grown children, right? He has 6 children. And it turns out that what has happened is that his wife has joined the devil, Because not only she's not a Quaker anymore, she's become what is Episcopalian, which is basically Church of England. Now remember that the Quakers rejected the Church of England, and the Church of England is bad. The Anglican Church, and by the way, it's huge still today all over the world in Africa. The Church of England is very big. And so he tries to get people to come to say we've got to have interest people in Jewish settlement in Palestine, and he starts publishing in Isaac Lisa's newspaper. But really what happens is he is going into a big ambush because his family said his wife and one of the sons moved to have him declared insane. And the grounds for insanity
they want the possessions.
They want the possessions. But by the way, they don't want they want to disown a Jewish father. He's gone Meshuggah. What's a Sephardi Jew rocking up there? He's a fine, upstanding Quaker, so it triggers a celebrity trial, an absolute sensational trial, because the trial, and this trial is backed by Walter Crescen's side, is taken by obviously Reverend Lisa, but Reverend Lisa, who's a strategic thinker, he understands. If we let this charge of insanity stand, it's a slur on Jews in America, because it means Judaism is a form of insanity.
Right.
So he fights it, and they hire a big trial lawyer, a former general, and they call dozens and dozens of witnesses. And one witness, by the way, is a figure from Eretz Yisrael, who's Rav Yosef Schwartz, Rabbi Dr. Joseph Yosef Schwartz, who is maybe a word about him.
So I think that was his sefer. Yosef Schwartz was they called him Hatayar Hagadol.
The great tourist.
The great tourist. He traveled from Germany, I think. He originated from Germany. And he traveled all over Eretz Yisrael, and he became such a mumcha in the topography of Eretz Yisrael. And, I want to explain, if you allow me, just one nakuda. Someone who comes to Eretz Yisrael and doesn't understand Arabic, at that time would probably not be able to identify where the Mekayim Sakdoshim were and where the different places.
Because the Arabs were preserving the
right. So you had to learn Arabic, okay, and then you had to make the connection between the Arabic pronunciation to the name of the place in Hebrew in the Tanakh, and he did all that, Rabbi Yosef Schwartz, and he became for many years like the mumcha in Gvulei Sa'aretz and other halachic things that have to do with Eretz Yisrael.
And he said, I found it to be perfectly reasonable. And the court there was, this was an academic. He was a doctor. He was an academic who was a researcher. So obviously had a certain amount of standing. But one of the other people that they came along with, Rabbi Ephraim, it just sounds so 19th century. It sounds pseudo-scientific. I just love this. We'll look at this in this detail. It says, many prominent citizens, and this was one of the great records of this case, was part of which I should have said before, I'm drawing on, is by a paper published at the University of Pennsylvania in the 70s by one Frank Fox. And he says, many prominent citizens, including 4 doctors, testified that on the contrary, Crescent was perfectly sane. And one expert witness was a certain Colonel Brown, who testified that the roots of Crescent's hair had none of the abnormalities that were certain indicators of insanity. In other words, this big learned Colonel Brown had investigated hair types, and he said, well, insane people have the roots of their hair. I don't know what happens. They go frizzy or something. He doesn't have it. The bottom line was the judge said, and this was the crucial thing, that he's sane, and that religious convictions are not allowed to be taken into account in determining sanity. Right?
And that was a turning point for religious rights in America.
Yes.
That thing. Now, I just want to point out that there was a stage in the court case where a jury ruled that he was insane. What you were quoting from now was they convened another.
Correct. The family had him declared insane, although there's no record, and this was that he was incarcerated in a lunatic asylum. He doesn't mention that, so it clearly didn't happen, and he went on the.
But it went through 2 stages. The first stage was that he was convicted as being insane, and the second one that was removed.
Yes, so it took a number of years. But the point is, by 1852, he returns to Yerushalayim, and he is involved in establishing Walter Crescent. Now is Michael Boyer's Crescent is involved in establishing agricultural colonies.
One were right outside of Yerushalayim. He started one of them right outside of Yerushalayim.
Do we know what that was?
Yes, once.
Was it Emek Rephaim?
Emek Rephaim, right. At that time, it was outside Yerushalayim. Now it's in
German colony was called over there. And he's married and his children died, but he was a frum Sephardi Jew and considered to be a leader of the community. And by the way, it's not strange that should be the case, because a man so full of drive and passion in that way, people can rise to the top in such a way.
And he probably had connections, right? I'm saying he had connections all
He
over.
was a prominent and successful person in his life. But the American writer Herman Melville, who was a famous Moby Dick, visits Yerushalayim in 1857, writes in his journal, Warder Crescent of Philadelphia, an American-turned Jew, divorced from former wife, married a Jewess, etc. Sad, right? That's what his comment is. But it's, again, that this is Frank Fock comes up with this, that it's believed that one of the great, Herman Melville wrote an epic poem called Clarel, which was an an enormous poem in which it centers on the doubts of the Victorian age, torn between traditional biblical belief and modern rationalism. And Herman Melville himself was very much torn between these two things. And the central character, Nathan, in the poem is believed to be the Warder Crescent. So you see, this is a man who's making an impact. And I think we can say that what happens is, 8 years after returning to Yerushalayim in 1860, around then, he dies. Warder Crescent dies. And I think which drew a chapter under, although he has descendants from his first marriage.
Right.
As I said, Christian descendants from first marriage, who I thought, well, ahead of this, maybe we should try and track some down. But the point is, I think, to some thoughts on his particular journey and the meaning of it. Because we know that he was rejected initially by the Yerushalayim Beis Din. And you could say that, if I was a member of the Yerushalmi Beis Din in the 1840s, I might very well reject him as well. What I was thinking, it was like, sounds like this kind of unstable, suspicious character who every so often rocks up today in Yerushalayim. It's a bit of a, you're not sure are they genuine? Are they a missionary?
By the way, I don't know how common that was at those days, but the fact that he was rejected is following halachic practice.
How common it was to attempt to convert?
Yes.
Because we know, by the way, missionary activity, for anyone who wants to see missionary activity from that period, still alive today, go to Kikar Davidka, right, in Yerushalayim, up above Geula, right, and go slightly along Rehov Hanavim, towards Rehov Strauss, stand with your back to, I think it's called the Abram Hostel, right, and look across the road, okay? You'll see across the road there's a compound, high walls, beautiful big things, and behind you can see clearly the building, etched in stone, huge, of the original, whenever the building was built 200 years ago, the London Society for Missionizing the Jews, it says, right? That's what it was. Right. There was a lot of missionary activity.
Now you're talking about the opposite, about someone who wanted to become a Jew, a Western Gentile want to become a Jew in the Beis Din of Yerushalayim. I don't know how common that was. But in any case, the fact that they rejected him, that was common practice. I don't think that should be
Absolutely.
finished.
No, not at all. But what we do know is that Isaac Lisa himself, his own testimony, he says like this, and this is the man who knew him best. In 1863, he writes, 3 years after his friend's death, he writes the following. Whatever may have been the eccentricities of Mr. Crescent, and so yes, he clearly was eccentric,
right?
And we are willing to admit them, he writes, he was a sincere convert to our religion and never wavered to his dying hour in his trust in the one for the glory of whose name it sealed his flesh with a token of the covenant with our father Abraham. I think there can be no greater testament than a person like that. And the testimony of also that Frank Fox writes there in his paper, he says, but from an anonymous German Jewish traveler who saw him in the 1850s, I once saw the proselyte Crescent at services, he said. He is a beautiful manly figure, a face vibrant with life and spirit, especially during his fervent, nearly uncontrolled devotion. And so, Rebbe Ephraim, there's a vein of commentary about him that, this was a whack job. This is a nutcase, right? And I think it would be to buy too much into that propaganda to say, no, being from, seeing the light, following the truth, even if it leads you, yes, he left his...
And the fact was that he didn't, once he reached that...
Once he reached, there was a stability as well.
Right, he did not change anymore.
And the point is, he left his wife and his kids. And I don't think I'm not sure any Rav who deals with Gira is going to tell you that's necessarily a good idea, although who knows. But the point is that this was a figure who saw long before other people, and who was living his own truth, but living it long before other people could see, that there is a Shivat Tzion, there's a return of Am Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael, and here he is, buried in Har HaZeisim for anyone who goes to see.
That was beautiful, Rabbi Gedalia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Behind the Times. We appreciate you joining us as we explore the stories and people that shape Jewish history. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with friends. Until next time.